I've waited to be able to say this. Please stand for the reading of the gospel. From the gospel according to Mark, in the 9th chapter. They went on from there and passed through Galilee. He did not want anyone to know it, for he was teaching his disciples, saying to them, "The Son of Man is to be betrayed into human hands, and they will kill him. And 3 days after being killed, he will rise again." But they did not understand what he was saying and were afraid to ask. Then they came to Capernaum. When he was in the house, he asked them, "What were you arguing about on the way?" But they were silent. For on the way, they had argued with one another who was the greatest. He sat down, called the 12, and said to them, "Whoever wants to be first must be last, the servant of all." Then he took a little child and put it among them. And taking it in his arms, he said to them, "Whoever welcomes one such child in my name welcomes me. And whoever welcomes me welcomes not me, but the one who sent me." This is the wisdom of the Lord. Thanks be to God. You may be seated. Once in a while, I like to read obituaries because I want to learn what somebody did with their life. I have this vague memory of a novel called The Obituary Writer, but I can't remember it well enough. But I do know that the main character, wanted to change obituaries to make them more interesting. And I thought, yeah, that would be good. People are more than facts and dates, after all. You know, an obituary, it says he worked for Boeing for 41 years, belonged to the Qantas Club, liked to play golf, fish, and do needlework, whatever. There's more to people than that. If I were doing obituaries, I write them as stories. Stories, not just the facts. More that would convey character than information. We don't fall in love with a series of facts. We fall in love with people, and people have stories. What is the story this person told with his or her life? Now we live in an information age, and we have to remember the Bible was written in a storied age. The vision of reality for them was God spoke into life, into the world, into the lives of people. I think in Sunday school, I've said a number of times that the book is the second subtext, because the first text, when we get together, is always ourselves and our faith. God speaks into our lives, sometimes in particular events, but also in a process, emerging and creating who we are. My professor, John Hick, always called this soul making, that's what we are about with our lives. We are more than facts. We are more than facts. Our lives are not just an obituary. Our lives are sacred stories. Sacred stories. I feel like we've been spiritually adrift and that we have been disconnected from our stories, and we need to be connected again. We first need to be connected again to the Bible stories. We don't connect to them like we used to because we now believe that they were just historical facts. They just happened. And when you make something a historical event rather than a metaphor, it loses all of its power. In the same way that I've said before, people will say, "That's just a symbol." Somebody will say, "Well, that's just a story." Just a story. Second, we need to be connected and in touch with our lives as stories. And the third, we need to relate to each other's sacred stories, more than people who are full of information, who value facts, attributes, data. We so easily objectify people. We want to learn about their measurable skills. Once we learn that, we can make judgments. I recall an old episode of Friends, and don't think that I like Friends. I don't, but I love this scene. Episode in which a cadre of friends were serendipitously interviewing a poor man to be a sperm donor. The questions were intrusive, very personal. They asked about his parents and grandparents and his personal hygiene. I think they even tried to look into his mouth at his teeth. And we all laugh. It's a funny thing. But it is something we do all the time, measuring people, objectifying people. I fear that when new people come into the church, one of the things that we might do is, I wonder if that person has computer skills. Do they know HTML? When we should be asking about their story. In Japan, they have special detectives to research prospective marriage partners. The thing they look for the most is mental illness. The effect of that is in Japan, when people tell their stories, that is never included. And I think we all know that anything like that is an important part of a person's story. The stories that God speaks are not perfect stories. They're all flawed, but then redeemed. Stories that God speaks include integrity and shame, strength and weakness, joy and sorrow, all about life. When we focus on the facts, look at life as resumes and obituaries, we inadvertently communicate that that's what's important. People, I believe, are much more than resumes and obituaries. Can we live our lives with each other knowing that we each hold a sacred story? During my second trip to Japan, I had been an exchange student, and I really liked living with the family, so I requested that, and I ended up at what the people there called a rabbit hutch, surrounded by farmland and what they called the genshirin, in primitive forest. I was at least 100 yards from the next building. I was in exile. That's what I felt. Then I remembered there's a Bible story about exile. It's one of the biggest stories. It's a macro story of the Old Testament. I think we understand biblical stories when we put them as templates for our lives, not just things that happened. They are things that happened that told the story of the Hebrew and Jewish people. Things that happening in our lives are also part of our story that we can relate to. Those stories, like the exile, that are in the Bible. When have we felt redeemed like Boaz redeemed Ruth? When have we wandered in the wilderness? Have you wandered in the wilderness? I've spent some time in the wilderness. When have we faced temptation? When have we been helped on the side of the road? When have we experienced forgiveness? When have we been persecuted, or when have we persecuted? When have we been loved into grace? All these things make up the stories of our lives. These stories are about life with God. They are true stories, even if they didn't happen. They're about our life and our faith. So first we need to reconnect to the biblical stories. Second, we're invited to consider our lives as stories more than obituaries. In memorial services, usually an obituary is read, but later at some time there's a eulogy in which there's sharing time, and the purpose is to bring this person who has passed into life so you can feel the person's character. Funny things are mentioned, like, remember the time Charles built the house of cards? He was so proud of it. We knew he would be an engineer, and remember how the dog tore it down and he decided he'd never make one of those again. Charles was quiet at first, but he would warm up to people. Charles always liked the water. He loved swimming in the Sound. It was like he felt safe in the water. These sort of things that you hear bring out the character and the beauty of a person. Third, we have to see others as carrying sacred stories imparted by God. Too often, as we objectify people, we look at them as competitors or difficult people. Every step through school and work and elsewhere, instead of seeing our comrades with sacred stories, they appear as opponents. Politics in particular has become the act of dismissing other people. We need to see people as carrying precious sacred stories to be held as if one were holding a child. I'm fearful of the trend in the midst of this pandemic is toward withdrawal, separation, and retreat. A decade ago, scholar Robert Putnam wrote the book Bowling Alone, in which he saw that Americans are no longer joiners, are more content to stay in their dens and watch TV. We have become, instead, according to Putnam, consumers. Even in the context of relationships, we have become consumers. Take online dating. I have to say, it's a wonderful tool for people to meet each other in a disconnected world. But it is consumer-driven. One is supposed to write a profile of oneself that is little different than a personal advertisement, and that advertisement has nothing negative about the person's profile. And we all know that's not possible in a person's story. Each of those profiles must always be optimistic and full of many talents. So we don't get the story, we just get an advertisement. We are not consumer people. We are not a people of withdrawal and retreat. We are a people of covenant, relationships, community, caring, connection, and love. And we need each other to be who we are really called to be by God. Relationships are the essence of who we are. We carry sacred stories in our hearts and in our lives. I feel that the pandemic has caused some numbness in us also. It has me. Does anybody else feel tired? But I hope that we don't take this time ahead of us as a time to retreat or leave. It's a time to come together with an incredible new opportunity for us. It's time to recommit to this people, to these sacred stories, and thereby to commit again to God, the storyteller. In the gospel text, Mark is telling the disciples about the story, that he will be betrayed, he will die and rise again in 3 days. But the disciples don't like it. That's not what they want to hear. Right after hearing that story, what did they talk about? Who's the greatest? It was dismissive and unconcerned. Many times when Jesus tells them what the story is about, the people say no. In this case, Jesus, after they said that, said to them, "Whoever welcomes one such child in my name welcomes me." There's the gospel once again. Seeing others as vulnerable children who have sacred stories, not as opponents, not as threats, but beautiful gifts. What we need is to reconnect to the stories in the Bible, to look at our own life as a story told by God, and to see other people in that context as well. We need to reconnect. Looking ahead, we will have adult Sunday school soon. I'm thinking about some heart groups, and we'll have Bible study. There are other ways in the midst of this that we can do that and continue to develop our sense of community. Remember that in Colossians and Ephesians, one of the most important things they counseled is for them to stay. Likewise, in John, when the people were wanting to leave, John told them to abide. Meno in Greek, abide. This is a time to be steadfast. Nurture our connections. Stress belonging and devotion and kindness and love. And to put always love first. Amen.